if you don't transform your pain, you will transmit it. And that was so important to me because our world is challenged by people guilty of nothing more than transmitting their fears and pain. And if you understand that people aren't really mean, people aren't really cruel, when people are being a bully, what they really are is afraid. And that gives them a vulnerability, and which gives you a different lens to see them through. Instead of seeing them as mean and cruel and a bully, you're seeing them as a fearful person. And that can give you some understanding and maybe even compassion that they're in need of.
Welcome to a Broaderlands podcast. The opinions expressed on Broaderlands podcast are those of the guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or Broaderlands podcast. Marcia, welcome to Broaderlands podcast. It's an honor to have you on.
Thank you, Boo Boo. I can't tell you what an honor it is to be here and how humbled I was by the invitation. Thank you so much. And I'm really grateful to you for giving me this opportunity. This is my first book and my first podcast, and I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to get the word out about the hope and joy that I believe the world is filled with.
Thank you, and I apologize. I called you Marcia earlier, so thinking Garcia in my head. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Yeah, we're here to talk about your book, The Lens of Hope and Joy, and like I said earlier before we started, I love your book. It's a really simple and heart-touching read, and I can relate to it 100% because I come from a whole different background, whole different area, but the human experience is the human experience, and I've learned how to focus on the inner and that same inner journey that we all share as a human being, and yeah, I'm so grateful. I've heard a lot of great spiritual teachers, a lot of open mindedness and open heart, and a lot of spiritual wisdom. So I really appreciate your book. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that you appreciated my book because you you are the epitome of what that journey is about. The journey of hope and joy and finding it through your pain and your suffering. And you're a hero and an amazing human being to come from what you have come from and to be here sitting today and spreading so much good news and joy in the world. And I
Thank,
appreciate that.
thank you. I usually don't take compliments very well, like I get, but I'm going to take that. I'm working on that. So I really appreciate it. And one of the acronyms for hope that I love to use in the 12-step community is help other people evolve, because that's what happened to me when I walked into the 12-step community. And I love how you talk about the 12 steps a little bit. And I always tell people, yeah, I learned how to repent in the 12 steps by going through the 12 steps. And you said it perfectly in your book. It means to change your way of thinking, and that's what I've learned through the process of a spiritual way of living. So I can totally relate to your book. So thank you again.
Thank you.
How did you come up with the name, and what inspired you to write a book?
So, what inspired me to write the book was in my spiritual journey. I'm a very practical person. So, I would say what inspired me to write the book was my practical nature.
Mm.
I am a seeker, and I read everything that I could get my hands on, and I'm so inspired by the written word.
Mm-hmm.
When I was going through life as an adult and raising my children and all the challenges that come with that, when things got really hard, I was never a person that thought this is hard. Now what? How I thought there's got to be somebody out there that has figured out a way to get through what it is that I'm trying to get through. And that usually is in a book somewhere. So I always went looking for books. I went looking for books and looking for answers. And I always had an open mind that, okay, I don't know how to do this, but there's somebody else out there that does, that can help me and teach me. So I took all the things that I learned and I kind of zeroed in and captured the ones that were the most impactful, the ones that were the most useful, um, the ones that were the most practical. And I just had this yearning that there were people out there that maybe these lessons could help. And so I took these lessons, and in my journey, I found that I could apply these lessons to a new lens. And so the inspiration was also in the symbol that I created, the symbol that came to me in my mind. And symbols hold power and drive actions and contain emotions that are attached and stirred. They're very powerful. Since the beginning of mankind, humans have used symbols to communicate. So, besides the practical messages that I had uh, zeroed in on in my spiritual journey, I also felt like I could take this practical symbol that I had developed and merge those together, and hopefully that could um, help people and direct people and guide people as it did me.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I love your symbol, and I love the the glasses, the lens, because I always say when I went through the 12 steps, when I got sober, and they showed me how to get on the spiritual path and develop my own. Um, I felt first of all I couldn't see. I didn't know that because I never read until I went to the 12 step community. I didn't even know how to read. I learned how to read. I had like second grade reading. But I got
That's
glasses.
amazing.
But I always say I learned how to look through the lens of the heart versus that conditioned and delusive ego, if that makes sense. And it was just when I came to the 12 step community, it was a very unhealthy ego I was living in. And what does Wayne Dyer say? A hostile person lives in a hostile world, and a loving person lives in a loving world, same world. So
Hmm.
I had to learn how to shift my perception from fear to
Hmm.
love, like Marianne would say, or you say it as well. So I really
Hmm.
appreciate it. You grew up? Did you grow up in Louisville? I had to say it like that just to mess with you. Louisville. um,
Yes, I was born and raised in Louisville. Um, again, I was a baby boomer in a Catholic family, and uh, I married my high school sweetheart. I got married at 19 years old, which is crazy to think about. When my children were 19 and I looked at them and thought about that I had gotten married at that age, I couldn't believe it. Um, I've been married though for 48 years, and together my husband and I
That's
raised
awesome.
four children, and now we have the blessing of 11 grandchildren. But I
Wow.
feel like being a parent is a tremendous teacher of love. I
Mm.
learned so much from the frustrations and challenges of raising children. It's that's where you learn unconditional love, which is I think what our purpose here on earth is. I think that's what obviously that Jesus represented. I think he was sent to us here on earth to show us pure love, what pure love is, what unconditional love is, and he lived that out. And uh, that's I think we're here to emulate that, to try to achieve that through his example.
I
Yeah.
know in the some of the New Thought communities they call him the Great Example, and I love that.
That's perfect. That's perfect. That's exactly. Um, and I just finished The Mystic Jesus that Marianne Williamson wrote, and I found out about it by your podcast and listening to your interview with her. And that's what that book is about as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. I really appreciate you watching it. Um,
Mhm.
what was your upbringing like? Were you raised religious, or were you just always on a spiritual journey? Or is there a difference between religion and spirituality for you?
Well, the origin of the word religion is to bind.
Mm,
And I believe that spirituality is about connectedness.
mm,
So they basically mean the same thing, but religion has been kind of hijacked by groups that that felt like that there was only one way, or they used it to a certain degree that separated us more than it bound us. So they can be and really should be the same thing, but I guess they're not, to some degree.
I love that answer because I say the same thing. You know, in religion it means to reconnect, rebind, or in the 12 step community, to
Uh-huh.
recover, it means to get back, or yoga
Uh-huh.
means to unite.
Yeah.
Um, yoke. So yeah, I
Well,
very
in the 12-step community, it's so important that you're always attending meetings. And the reason it's important to always attend meetings is because we need constant reminding as
mm,
human beings. You know, once you wake up, once you are awake, um, it doesn't mean you're going to stay in that situation, because the ego is always trying to get back in. The ego is always trying to deny you joy and deny and keep you separated. So, just as the 12 step program, you need to attend meetings to constantly be reminded. Religion can serve in that same context. And religion can, by attending church, by attending your services, it's kind of the same thing. It can keep you connected to God and constantly remind you of that connection. Um, when it's being its higher purpose. So religion has a point, and I'm not anti-religion, but it as Richard Rohr would call it, mature religion is religion with a higher consciousness that understands your connections and its purpose to guide a soul. It's not necessarily to tell us what to believe, but to allow us to find our truths and find that pure love that we're searching for.
yeah, I love that. How did you become so open minded? Were you always that way, or because sometimes when you're going to church, like it's there's a lot of beauty in church. I always say there's one word I can describe every in every religion, and it's a saloa, which means serving and loving one another, because that's really the essence.
Mhm.
Serving and loving one another. But like you said, it can get hijacked, and then it
Mhm.
becomes a collective ego, and then it's us against them mentality. But
Mhm.
there's been some beautiful human beings that came from all walks of life in religions, like Thomas Rent in your neighborhood. You know,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
he was a beautiful human being that tapped into that heart of consciousness, that oneness, and he related so perfectly with the Vietnamese Buddhist Zen master
Mhm.
monk Thich Nhat
Mhm.
Hanh. They looked at each other as they were brothers. There was no difference between them, between each other, because they were more in
Right.
tune to the. They understood each other, and but that's hard to do for a lot of people.
Mhm.
Um, you know, when Jesus becomes
Well,
the only way, it becomes division for some
right,
people.
right. Well, my mother, um, when she married my dad, she converted to Catholicism in order to marry my dad so that
Mm.
they could get married in the church. That was one of the rules. So my mother converted to Catholicism. So I feel like that I was more open-minded because being raised by my mother, who wasn't as programmed into Catholicism. She didn't grow up with the extreme dogma um, in her face to program her and wire her towards that that mindset. So I feel like one of the ways that I remained open minded was through my mom, and I don't. There's so many things that, as a parent, that you remember your parents saying. Little things that you remember your parents saying, and I remember my mom saying over and over and over again, "The mind is like a book; it only works when it is open." So that just stuck with me, and I realized that. Rigid beliefs and judgments confine you. It confines God's love. It confines you. You have to be, I feel like you need to be open to so much that's out there that the universe has to offer.
I love that. And, even in the 12 step community, they taught me willingness, honesty, and open mindedness from the very beginning. But you can find dogma in the 12 step community as well, where you're doing it wrong. That's not the way it's done. It becomes really dogmatic. And, that it seems like the human being always finds a way to, I don't know if it's unconsciously finds the collective ego, or it becomes dogmatic in a groupthink setting, which can be tough at times. I know it's been hard for me in my journey in the 12 step community at times, because it can be very dogmatic, but there's so many beautiful things as well. And that's why I stay in. I love the 12 step community because there's so much beauty in it as well. But just
Yes,
like
there
religion,
is.
it can become very religious for some people as well.
Well, one of my major influencers in my spiritual journey has been Father Richard Rohr.
Mm.
And, he wrote an entire book, the Breathing Underwater, which is, uh, he kind of compares the 12 steps to what he calls true religion or mature religion. And, and I know the 12 step doesn't want to be referred to as a religion, but if you follow the teachings in the 12-step program, um, it can lead you to places that sometimes religion can't lead you to, because there's so much. First of all, lose the ego. Um, Second of all, that you need to atone for your mistakes, admit them, and atone, and then how much service is a part of what humanity really needs in order to feel, um, it's a spiritual high that when you serve another person, that's a spiritual high that replaces the the high of the drug of choice.
Yeah, I love that. How would you define the ego? I know some people say you can have an healthy ego. Some people says it's completely bad. I always say the ego's not your amigo when you're unconscious of it. But when I become conscious of this sense of self, and some of the wrong perceptions and the layers of false identities that I put upon myself, whether it was consciously or unconsciously through my relationship with my environment, I got to see how it can create disconnection with myself and others and harm. But I also see if you create somewhat of a healthy ego by learning how to live on spiritual basis, develop awareness, and start to question my perception, and to see how I got these beliefs and these identities. You can create somewhat of a healthy ego to tap into the heart, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Well, I don't think your ego is your enemy if you're aware that it's
Mm.
your ego. It's when your ego is running the show
Mm,
that it can be dangerous. But once you realize that there's these two parts to yourself, your false self and your true self, your ego and your soul, um, and then like I drive home the message in my book, the wolf of fear and the wolf of love. All those are metaphors, for the two parts to our humanity. So I don't think your ego has to be your enemy as long as you're awake, and
mm.
understand that it's your ego and you recognize it, and then you can calm it down and um, you can use it to your advantage in that you're not necessarily living through your ego. It's there, but you're living from your heart.
I love that. It's the servant became the master at one time, but now
Mhm,
it's the servant again. As I learned how to live on a spiritual basis and broaden my awareness. So
mhm.
yeah, that makes sense. Did you have like some kind of painful event to wake you up, or was it more of the educational variety? You just started to wake up little by little, a few aha moments or questioning.
No, it was, anxiety and stress. It was, it was that wolf of fear that had taken over my life, and, but really what I was doing was not living in the present. I was, thinking more about, mistakes of the past, but it was really mostly about fears for the future. I was in the throngs of raising my 4 children, and the world was changing so fast. I had grown up with, Andy of Mayberry and Leave It to Beaver, and, I have these children that I'm trying to mold and raise, and all of a sudden there's the music with the violence, and there's the video games with the violence, and this is happening so fast, and it was just everywhere and spreading so much, and I'm trying my best to control and hang on, and feeling like that I've got to protect and keep them from all this. And there's no way. There's no way to do it. So I was just stressed and anxious, and I was so focused on everything that was so wrong with the world and everything that was so wrong with life that I realized I was missing what was right with the world and what was right with life, because what you focus on expands. So when you're focused on what's wrong with the world and with life, you're going to get more of that. So this is what sent me into my spiritual search. My journey was just the stress and anxiety that I was feeling from the bringing children into this world and wanting them to be good, caring people. And I felt like all these forces were working against me. And I felt like I was at war with them. So, because I was always focused on that. So I started to, like I said, I turned to books. Okay, how can I figure this out? How can I make this better? And I realize now what a blessing that was, because of what I learned through through all that. My pain is what taught me, and not that there weren't other challenges along the way as well. That's part of being human. Yes, there were situations and circumstances that were very, very um, challenging to get through, but I learned the coping skills, and I learned to look at it in a new lens and see where it was going to take me and what it was going to teach me.
Yeah, thank you. Bill Wilson said, "Pain is the touchstone to spiritual progress." I was in so much pain, I finally woke up and I started to question things. I stopped speaking victimese and I started to look at myself,
I
look at my
love that.
life
I love that. I heard you say that, on Marianne's podcast, and that is so perfect.
Well, isn't it funny how like the mind automatically wants to blame? Like I don't know if you I always catch myself every once in a while something's not going right, something goes wrong and I'm so quick to want to point at someone else instead of really
Mhm.
just pausing and looking at the situation for what it is. it's
That
almost like
well
a reaction at times.
well, that's the ego.
Yeah.
That's the ego, that's the false self. Yeah, it's very easy to blame. Yeah.
The wolf story, the two wolves. When you first heard that, what did it do for you? Because when I first heard that saying about the two wolves, and I'd love for you to share it because some people may not have even heard about the two wolves. But when I first heard it, it really got me looking at me and my mental diet, as Emmett Fox would talk about, and what am I feeding my mental diet on a daily basis. And it really helped me. I always say spirituality is taking responsibility for my own life and my own thoughts, my own actions. Um,
Mhm.
how did that affect you? How did it touch you when you first read that quote?
Well, when I first read that quote, it was so profound, and I printed it out, and I kept it on my refrigerator. I also put it in frames and, gave it to my husband, gave it to my children, because I just felt like it kind of, I mean, it put everything into perspective. Can I read it?
Sure.
Can okay. An elderly chief took his grandchildren into the forest and sat them down and said to them, "A fight is going on inside of me. It is a terrible fight between two wolves. One is the wolf of fear, hatred, anger, selfishness, self pity, and lack. The other is the wolf of love, compassion, humility, gratitude, kindness, hope, and joy." The children were very quiet and listening attentively to their grandfather. He then said, "This same fight between two wolves that is going on inside of me is going on inside of you and every other person." They thought about it for a minute, and then one child asked the chief, "Grandfather, which wolf will win?" He said quietly, "The one you feed." And that's how the book starts. And that theme runs throughout the book. That what I learned I learned to say to myself, "This is the wolf of fear. I need to I need and there's so many of the spiritual um authors that in the books that I read that talked about all there is fear and love. There's only two emotions, fear and love. So this story about the wolf is basically saying the same thing. It's kind of grouping the emotions from love and grouping the emotions from fear all together into two parts: the true self, the false self, the ego, the soul. It's all the same message. And I feel like that the book drives this home, and that is what that's what kind of it sets it apart. And it's simple and it's practical.
Well, you know what I always say. It's kind of like a when you first learn how to drive stick shift. You know, in the very beginning, you're thinking about the clutch, about swerving back at a red light, and all the different gears and the brakes, and But after a while, it becomes second nature.
Hmm.
And that's the same thing with spiritual principles, at least for me. In the beginning, it's really hard. I'm trying to figure out, things out and trying to, do I need to make an amends or, start really just being more aware and more responsible for my daily life. But after a while, I'm getting better and better at it. Now I'm starting to cruise on this stuff. And every once in a while, I hit a speed bump and, get off alignment and all that. Um, but I can get back on the road and start driving again, by applying these principles. And yeah, it's made it.
Basically, the principles that I felt like were the most profound and the most practical that I wanted to put in this book was that um, we create our reality with our thoughts. We create our own reality with our thoughts. That was mind blowing to me when I learned that. And it's kind of woo woo when you first hear it, but if you really and I kind of simplified it in the book with that example that we've all experienced being in a room and somebody enters the room and they light up the room. Or we've experienced being in a room and somebody walks in the room and the tension can be cut with a knife. And so we are energy and we carry that energy and you can feel it. You can feel another person's energy. And how else would you be expressing that energy other than through your thoughts? Your thoughts are energy. So when I learned that we create our own reality and we do that with our thoughts, that was one number one profound lesson. And then the second thing was that there's only fear and love, and all emotions are either attached to love or attached to fear. And then the third thing was from Richard Rohr, where he says that if you don't transform your pain, you will transmit it. And that was so important to me because um, our world is challenged by people guilty of nothing more than transmitting their fears and pain. And if you understand that people aren't really mean, people aren't really cruel, when people are being a bully, what they really are is afraid. And that gives them a vulnerability and which gives you a different lens to see them through. Instead of seeing them as mean and cruel and a bully, you're seeing them as a fearful person. And that can give you some understanding and maybe even compassion that they're in need of. So I took those three things that I felt like are the cornerstone and the basis of the book.
I love that, and I love how you share the different spiritual teachers, even from Father G to Richard
Oh
Rohr,
yeah, I
Thomas
love
Merton,
Father G.
the
Yeah.
Buddha,
Uh-huh.
Khalil Gibran. You teach all you share all these different teachers from all walks of life sharing the same truth. The Buddha said, "With our thoughts, we create the world, but we have to see where the world created our thoughts first." When I go through the 12 steps, when I go through the fourth step, I got to see how all these different things that I experienced affected me, whether it's good
Mhm.
or bad, and
Mhm.
how it fogged up my window of perception. And when I started to see how that affected me, my brain development, the traumas, the hurts, the resentments, the anger, that in the trapped emotions, and it started to lose power over me because I had that awareness. And when I
Mhm.
could see how it created ignorance within me, I could see how I can question other people's upbringings and the way they grew up. When I moved to Ohio, I was in Cincinnati, and one day I'm at work, and some guy comes up to me and says, "I hate Mexicans," right? And my old self might have been reactive in a different way, but I am able to step back because I understand what I went through and how things affected me through my upbringing. And
Mhm.
like you said, understanding, and I love what Thich Nhat Hanh says, understanding is love's other name. And I can look at his environment. Maybe he was taught in a household that had a lot of anger and hate and discrimination towards other people. And I love how in your book you bring the news, the media, and how the media can affect us in a negative way at times if we're not aware of it. And
Mhm.
so I
Mhm.
just by having that understanding, I don't have to respond back in a negative way. What I don't like in that person, I'll become if I'm not aware. And that changed everything for me. And and I told myself, let me give this guy a different story. Let me change the story of what he thinks of me.
Mhm.
Maybe if he got that from the news or from his upbringing or whatever, let me change the story and be more compassionate with him and not react. And I
Mhm.
did. That's exactly what I did, and that's
Mhm.
because of awareness, within myself and just awareness of others as well. So
Right, right. And you brought up all the spiritual teachers. That's one thing about my book is that um it's about so much from what I learned from all these other people. And I've given credit to all these other people. So there's not a lot of originality there. It's again the profound lessons that I learned through these other spiritual teachers. But then I just felt like I kind of put a twist on it by bringing those things together and introducing the symbol of the lens, seeing God in all people in all situations, learning to look for God uh, and see the grace that is offered when you're looking for it.
yeah, thank you. You
Mm.
just remind me some of Miser Eckhart quote that I was gonna use with you, but I ended up picking something else. But yeah, when you said that right now, but I love that because even those spiritual teachers learn from other people as well. I mean, I heard Wayne Dyer one time say when his quote, "When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change." He learned that from someone in the 1920s that he heard give a talk. So they
Mhm.
all learn from me. So I like to look at it as the flowering of consciousness, and just continues to flow. And that's a
Uh-huh.
part of your journey. They touched your heart, and I'm sure they had other people that touched their heart, and so on. So I really love your book. So I felt like
Mhm.
yeah, we understand each other. So
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah.
And I love your symbol. It's a beautiful symbol. Would you want to touch more on that? Because you talk about the different lenses, right? I know Carl Jung. You talked about looking through the lens of darkness versus the lens of I don't know, brightness. Correct me.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Well, speaking of Carl Jung, he also says that condemnation does not liberate.
Mm,
Condemnation oppresses. So, that is so obvious in our day and time right now that condemnation oppresses because so much of what is out there is uh, condemning people, condemning the side, there's so much negativity in condemnation going on. And where is that getting us? What is it getting us? It's expanding more and more. And, I also quote in there the Center for Action and Contemplation, which Father Richard Rohr founded, is one of their core principles is that oppositional energy only creates more of the same. And that's the same thing, it's basically saying the same thing that condemnation oppresses. So that's what my hope is for this lens, for people to see more hope and joy, and will bring more hope and joy because what you focus on expands, what you plant grows bigger. And like I said, the negativity, the toxicity is always knocking on your door. But I found so much hope and joy when I went out there looking for it. And that brings me to the organization that helped me to find it, which is Dress for Success Louisville. Um, I saw a story on 60 Minutes about Dress for Success Worldwide in New York City. And at the time, there were about 50 of these organizations in the United States. So this story was on 60 Minutes. And then after that, the growth that they experienced was huge because the good news was spreading. Uh, this concept of helping women to help themselves, when people saw it, wanted to get on board and open more affiliates and grow the organization. So that just shows you um, how what news can do. It can spread negativity, but it can also spread so many positive things. So, anyway, when I got involved with this organization, and I've been involved with it for 24 years, all on a volunteer level in so many different capacities. But it has been a highlight of my life being involved with this organization because it's constantly showing me the goodness in the world on so many levels. Uh, the people that want to help, the people that show up, the hard work that people put in to make a difference in somebody's life. It's never easy, these nonprofit organizations. You're constantly pulling teeth to try to get money and keep the doors open. And the people that will stick in with you and continue to do that, to keep the doors open and to continue to be able to help people. And they come out on donation days and they come to fundraisers, and people are so good. There's so much goodness, and they just want to help and make the world better. Um, but you I feel like you don't hear about that as much. It's just not on the news. So a lot of times that's where people get their perception of what the world is what's going on in the world is by watching the news. And that I found this whole different perception by being involved, going and looking for it, and maybe not watching the news. It's like there's two different worlds out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's two different worlds out there. So
I
I just chose to look for the one that filled my heart.
love that. In your book, you talk about searching for heaven, and then you said, I think there's a chapter, is Heaven Found.
Mhm.
What's your take on heaven and hell?
Well, I believe that heaven is when you're aware of and connected to your God, and when you're connecting to and being of service to other people. That is heaven. I think hell is a disconnection with your God when you're living through your ego. Um, there's people are people today are looking so hard and trying to find happiness in all the wrong places. And I think that's hell. Just this rat race, this constantly trying to fill this void that people feel. And the answer is right there inside of you. It's right there, but you have to see it. You have to put on the lens and see it.
I always say, when you find heaven within yourself, heaven will shine on those around you. Um, I
You have
love
some
that.
beautiful sayings. Have you written a book?
Yeah, I'm actually writing a book, and what amazed me about what you wrote is what I'm putting in my book as well. And what I before I even found your book, I used to share this in the 12 step meetings. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of
Kingdom
heaven.
of heaven.
And I
Yeah.
would connect it with 1, 2, and 3 steps, 1, 2, and 3. And on page 60 in the big book, it says, being convinced that a life run on self-will could hardly be a success. And then when I tap into that, the divine, the great reality deep down within me, as it says in the big book, I could find the kingdom of heaven. When you find God in yourself,
Mhm.
you can see God in others as well.
I am so grateful that I was exposed to the 12 steps. And I've read the big book. I
Mm.
read the whole thing through, and I learned so much from that experience. And I learned so much. Like I said in the book, I had the privilege and honor of attending a couple of meetings, and I just felt like they were such a spiritual experience. And I left there just feeling like sometimes I never felt at church, you know.
Mm.
I do now. I do now. I love to go to church, and I love the, to be reminded and reconnected. And, some people have a hard time doing that on their own. And so church is a good place to go. But the 12 step meetings to me are like an amazing church.
Yeah, thank you. You use a term in your book, becoming grace. Um,
Mhm.
that's, to be honest, and I'm not trying to be funny. I don't even have a definition for grace. I never really used it. How would you define grace, and becoming grace?
Well, in Gary Zukav's book, Seed of the Soul, his definition of grace is spiritual energy.
Mm,
So I see grace as spiritual energy. And becoming grace to me would be, I mean, you are grace.
mm,
Uh, you're bringing spiritual energy to this world every single day. So you did become grace, and you are that. And we all have the opportunity to be grace for another person, and grace is all around us. Uh, and it's something that if you don't have that lens on, you might miss it, and you don't recognize it as grace. Just little bitty actions that people do for each other that are grace. And lift anything that lifts you up, anything that somebody does that makes you feel good, makes you feel a little love, makes you see God. That's grace. Um, but then I also say in the book that sometimes grace comes disguised in other ways. Anything that, when you take your pain and you use that pain to transform your life, uh, to become something different, that's also grace. So your pain can be grace as well. It's not just something that's a beautiful feeling, but it can be something that's painful too. I see grace as anything that catapults you in your spiritual life.
that. What about your conception of God? What has it changed since you were younger to this point?
Oh, absolutely. I grew up thinking that God was the bearded man up in the sky. And now I see God as a life force and energy that fills the world. And that energy is love. So, I say in the book that there's only one word that I see to describe God, and that is love. I mean, that's nothing new. That's been said for centuries, but I do feel it now. I really feel that God is love, and love is all around us. And this lens that I have allows me to see God in all situations, all things, and all people.
The Bhagavad Gita, and I shared this with Neil Donald Walsh. It says, I look upon all creatures equally. None are more dear and none are less dear. But those who worship me in love come to life in me, and I come to life in them. And then the Bible says, he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God and God in him. It's that universal truth. And when we tap into that heart, that division goes away. I was talking to my friend Justin yesterday, and he was talking about, because he has a newborn, he was talking about watching 3-year-olds play together, a little black girl with a little white boy. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
what he was saying. And there was no division. There was no
Right.
hatred. There was no racism. There was no conditioned thinking. It was just pure love in action. Until
Mhm.
we look at how this world conditions us a certain way, if we're not
Mhm.
careful, if we're not mindful. And I think that's the beauty of spirituality, is really just being more aware.
Mhm.
And I think you touched on it in your book as well, about sin means missing the mark, and missing the mark of what? It's really love. And
Mhm.
for me,
Mhm.
and today I'm
I
more aware
just
of that.
absolutely. And I just returned from a trip, and I was in France. and we visited, this cave that was 17,000 years old,
Mm,
and, we had a guide, and she was a female archaeologist. And I felt like this was so interesting, and I'm always thinking deeper into situations and things that I learn. But she said that caves 17,000 years ago, we always thought that the people lived in the caves, and she said that they did not live there, that the caves were almost like their church, that their caves were a place that they went to and had like a spiritual experience. And there was all these drawings in the cave is what we went in to see. And the drawings were of animals. And what was interesting to me was there was no violence whatsoever. The animals were dancing and the animals were living together. And the animals that they drew were buffalo, um, rhinoceroses, and goats, mountain goats. She said they ate reindeer. They killed and ate reindeer. They didn't draw any reindeer. They only drew the peaceful animals. So then she went on to tell us that writing, um, she wanted to know if we knew the origin of writing and when that came to be. And I didn't have any idea, but writing came to be when trading began and ownership began. So it's almost like before that, people were living peacefully, and there wasn't the threats from people. But once the trading and the ownership began, they had to write down. Began to not trust each other, and they had to write things down in order to confirm that this is what it is, this is what it is. So I'm kind of going back to what you said about these children, their innocence, and that there was no division. So could be that us humans were the same way. There wasn't division until we started to have to possess things and own things.
thank you for sharing that. What would you say the purpose of life is?
I believe the purpose of life is to find pure love. And I think that Jesus was that symbol that, he came here to teach us how to live. And in his life, he, there was no judgment, none whatsoever. His love was completely unconditional. And how we've missed that so much through the years. There's so much contradiction about Jesus. You say that he's unconditional, but then there's, but the only way to get to heaven is through him. That sets a condition. That sets a condition on getting to heaven. But again, I just believe that heaven is here on earth. I think we're all, when we die, I think we're all just in this fabulous, wonderful state, and that our heaven and our hell are here on earth.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And when you said that right now, going back to God, in Corinthians it says love keeps no record, and it's often said God is love, but then there's a judging God, a jealous God. You got to fear God. But I like to just say love is God, and then it just removes all the other things added on by man. And then when
Mhm,
you really focus on love, you're focusing on, God. Or
mhm,
like Ernest Holmes will say, we should find this God in each other, love this God, forgetting all else. And I love
mhm,
that. It really comes down to love. And I think all the religions teach that, but often forget that and becomes that
mhm.
us against them mentality, which is
Right.
the original meaning of sin for me, is missing the
Mhm.
mark of love.
Yep. Yep. And then I think we also should talk about the word repent.
Yeah.
The sin is missing the mark, and repent means to shift your mind. And then we're also told that do not be afraid. We're told 365 times in the Bible, do not be afraid. Then we're told shift our mind, repent, shift your mind. So if you're not supposed to be afraid, then you shift your mind away from that fear. And there's only fear and love. So if you're shifting your mind away from fear, where are you going? You're going to love.
And I love that saying in Christianity where it says, we're all God's children, which means we're all related. We're all related. Mm-hmm. And it seems like when we forget that, that's when the problems begin.
Mm-hmm. I believe that we're all spiritual beings, divine spiritual beings, having a human experience. And every person on this earth is a human being, a spiritual being having a human experience.
I believe that as well. Thank you. If you had one message to give to the world and everyone was listening, what would you say?
Repent.
I love
that. Shift your mind. Yeah. So we need to get away from our ego-minded way that we live, and find our sameness and our be aware of our consciousness. Albert Einstein said that no problem can be solved at the same level of consciousness from which it was created. And all of our problems were created at the ego level, at the level of fear, the fear of not having enough or not being enough. And so that means that our solutions to all these problems are going to be found at our level of consciousness, at the level of love, at the level of compassion and understanding.
Like that. Marianne Williamson says a lack of love is the level of the problem, and a lack of love is the level of the solution.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Do you have anything else you would like to say about your book or your journey that pops up?
Well, you had asked me about my outer journey and my inner journey. And my inner journey was inspired by all the authors that I read, all the books that I read. My inner journey was a lot of contemplative thought, a lot of thought that went into changing my perception. My outer journey was what I saw outside, and how I changed my lens and then could see differently on the outside. The inner journey was in my heart, in my mind. The outer journey was the world out there that I learned to look at with a different perspective.
I'm going to end it with the Thomas Merton quote, since it's from your hood. And he said, if you want to know what is meant by God's will in man's life, this is one way to get a good idea of it. God's will is certainly found in anything that is required of us in order that we may be united with one another in love. Thank you for coming on. It was an honor.
Boo-boo, it was my honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and take care. Namastizzle. Just know we out here. Know we out here working in a major way. Had to speak on it just to make a play. Any given subject, know we make a way. Time to level up on the day-to-day. Know we out here working for the greater good. Expand your mind, broaden your lens the way you should. From the stars to the galaxy to speak on spirituality. Higher understanding for the